Stacktastic, the weekly web show for the avid comic book reader and those who aspire to become so. This week, my comic book from Boom Studios, Supurbia, is relaunching as an ongoing title, and that's thanks to all of you who picked up the miniseries last spring. And for that miniseries, I did a new top 10 list for each issue, and now the tradition continues. First up, one a number of you have been asking for, top 10 comic book villains. And beware, with lists like this, there are always spoilers. And a top 10 villains list is the perfect fit, as the first story arc of Supurbia focuses on Helen Hart, the reformed supervillain secretly shacking up with Meta Legion member Sovereign. Can she be reformed? As you'll see today, that's become the norm with comic book villains. Number 10 is Loki. But wait, isn't he the big bad in the third highest grossing film of all time, The Avengers? How could he be at the bottom of this list? Well, let me tell you, being brought to life by Tom Hiddleston has been a double-edged sword for old Loki. On the one hand, it's raised his profile tremendously, not just with comic book fans, but the mainstream. But on the other hand, suddenly Loki has become a bit of a heartthrob, and with popularity comes a desire to reform. Thus his changing role in Kieran Gillen's journey into mystery, where Loki was reborn as a tween, complete with his own love interest. And his new anti-hero status has been so well received that for Marvel now, he's joined the Young Avengers. That's right, the very first villain that the Avengers faced has now joined one of their teams. It's only out of respect to his past and silver screen evil machinations that he's still on this list. Number 9 is Reggie Mantle. Now hear me out, let's remember that Reggie Mantle is often the very first villain that a young comic book reader encounters. And if Archie Andrews is your average hot-blooded teenage boy, then that makes Reggie Mantle your average douche. Yes, way before fellow villain Gaston thought he was God's gift to all mankind, and especially women, Reggie wondered why he was losing out to Archie for Veronica's affections, or even competing with him in the first place. But yet again, Reggie has recently been redeemed in the pages of Life with Archie, which follows Riverdale's famous teen clique into adulthood. In the Archie marries Veronica side, he and Betty have hooked up and have a reality television show, while in the Archie marries Betty side, he's a talented reporter working for his father's newspaper who's wound up finally winning over Veronica's heart. If only all teenage bullies matured with the same grace as Reggie Mantle. Number 8 is the Plutonian, the Superman archetype turned villain in Mark Waid's Irredeemable. How'd he get on this list? Well, first off, to keep it interesting, you'll find that this top 10 list focuses on current compelling villains, and not just the old favorites from the big two. Mark Waid's Irredeemable and its spin-off Incorruptible have been Boom's most popular superhero titles to date, allowing the smaller publisher to match the sales of some of even the big two's titles. Plus, they're written by Mark Waid, one of the best and most successful writers in the industry. Waid said he wanted to show the journey of the world's greatest superhero becoming the world's greatest supervillain, and he does in spades, along with the efforts of this world's Justice League to stop him. Due to time restraints imposed by other projects, Waid ended both titles with issue 37 and 30 respectively, and in the end, the Irredeemable Plutonian was somewhat redeemed. Why can't we help ourselves to not help these villains? Finally, at number 7, two villains who have yet to be redeemed, Lex Luthor and Norman Osborn. You think the real world 1% is bad? They've got nothing on the 1% in comics, where business titans like Luthor and Osborn use their company's resources for straight up evil. That's right, Luthor and Osborn aren't just obsessed with taking down Superman and Spider-Man. Luthor is also a major weapons manufacturer, while Oscorp has polluted so many bloodstreams at this point, who can keep track? And just like your typical businessman, both have had political ambitions as well. Luthor manipulated his way into the presidency, while Osborn manipulated his way into S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers, remaking both in his own image. So why aren't these iconic bad guys higher on this list? That's because recently both have lost their way. Luthor jumped the shark with his garishly colored exoskeleton, what's with bad guys always wearing purple and green, and has taken a serious backseat to other Superman villains in the New 52. As for Osborn, he's become some kind of villainous messiah with his own cult-slash-gang, and while that evolution has been well written, it's also been largely ignored by the Marvel Universe. Yes, if a villain evolves and nobody in comics notices, did it really happen? But at least they're still both rotten to the core. Number 6 is Cyclops. Oh boy, is his villain stock rising, and I love it. In all new X-Men, Scott Summers has indeed lived up to the prophecy of this old Fear Itself teaser, only difference being he appears to have drank his own Kool-Aid. Yeah, Magneto put on a good show, but he never bought into his own hype. But then again, there are a few things more interesting than a villain who sincerely believes in his own cause and cannot be shaken from that belief, especially when it seemed Marvel would redeem him at the end of AVX. Instead, though, now Cyclops is branding flat scans with an X and making that endearingly lame X sign everywhere he goes. If the Scarlet Witch's meltdown made her Marvel's Britney Spears, then Cyclops is their Charlie Sheen. True, in similar fashion, this might decimate the credibility of the character, but Cyclops never enjoyed Two and a Half Men's popularity. And it's wonderfully realistic that not all X-Men are perfect little soldiers in the name of Xavier. Here's hoping Scott Summers and Illyana Rasputin are also never redeemed. By the way, who else wishes Beast would get off his self-righteous high horse already? He's becoming a major buzzkill, and his jeopardizing the entire time stream simply to stick it to Scott is hardly sympathetic. Maybe you're wrong, Hank. Number 5 is Geppetto, and if you don't read Fables, you probably think I've lost my mind. But if you do read Fables, you know that Geppetto is no longer just a lonely toy maker, but a conqueror of worlds, Fable homelands to be exact. His campaign was so ruthless that he's the reason the Fables were forced to flee to the mundane, aka human world, the entire premise of Vertigo's long-running comic. It took nearly 80 issues to unmask and defeat him. Sorry, non-Fables readers, but I did warn you there were spoilers ahead. However, even if you do know who's pulling the strings, you can still enjoy the first few volumes of Fables, tales of such epic scope that it would be impossible to do them justice on the small screen, thus sadly clearing the way for the much less elaborate and cheaper to produce Once Upon a Time. But Fables is still going strong, just celebrating its 10-year anniversary, and continues to be the cornerstone of DC's Vertigo line. I'd also like to note that this is another villain who so far has been irredeemable. He might have been defeated and he might have been cowed, but I do believe he's planning his revenge as we speak. Number 4 is Talia al Ghul, who, by the way, is the only woman to make it onto this list. See, the problem with female villains is that they are almost always redeemed. Catwoman, Poison Ivy, Harley Quinn, Black Cat, Star Sapphire, Mystique, Rose Wilson. As soon as they become a potential date for our hero, suddenly they're not so evil anymore. And if you're thinking, hey, isn't that what you're doing with Helen? Well, I say, keep reading. As for Talia, never mistake her love for Batman for a desire to end her evil ways. In fact, Talia is always hoping it's Batman who will change his ways, joining her by her side to rule her father's empire and the world. But alas, he just won't cooperate. Men. So instead, she's become the DC Universe's meanest divorcee, not only battling Batman for the fate of the world, but for their son's mind and heart as well. Yeah, she's also on this list because she's Batman's baby mama, the only one of his conquests to actually live the dream. Here's hoping that with Ra's al Ghul seemingly retired permanently and her tentacles wrapped tightly around DC's most successful franchise, Batman, Talia will have the opportunity to rise higher on this list, crappy movie treatment aside. Plus, it never hurts to have Grant Morrison in your corner. Number 3 is Ozymandias. While he only menaced a single limited series, oh what a limited series that was! Alan Moore's Watchmen, along with Frank Miller's work in the same time period, redefined the comic book industry, making it a much darker and realistic place. And while Dr. Manhattan had the powers of a god, it was the world's smartest man who thought and acted like a god. But as Moore turned the looking glass in all the comics that had come before, he also blurred the lines between hero and villain, whose clarity had been a staple of comics. Who's to say who's the real villain of Watchmen? Aren't they all guilty on some level of villainous behavior, and yet also of doing some good? And it's in that gray area that Ozymandias loses his way, one of the first comic book characters to do evil while intending to do good. Could Cyclops have ever become what he is today if Ozymandias hadn't gone there first? On a side note, I do recommend the Before Watchmen Ozymandias mini, which further delves but does not excuse this conflict of intentions and actions. Now, numbers 1 and 2 were tough, but ultimately I decided that Magneto would take second place. But wait a minute, isn't he one of the most redeemed villains in comics? One day he's fighting the X-Men, one day he's one of them. But to the guy's credit, redemption never takes. Why? Because his hatred of Homo sapiens was born from another hatred, anti-Semitism. Magneto's origin story as a young Jewish German boy who survived the Holocaust was a stroke of brilliance, not only showing how hatred and violence can twist a man's soul, but how that same hatred and violence is part of a never-ending cycle. Magneto has never been able to see that he himself has become what he hates most. Yes, Magneto is a good man whose heart has been blackened by the evils of the world, making him perhaps the most tragic villain on this list. As far as Magneto is concerned, it's not him, but the world that must seek redemption. Number 1 is, you guessed it, the Joker. And on a list where redeemability is a major handicap, that's something the Joker has never had to worry about. You can't redeem pure evil. Magneto's heart might be blackened, but it's the Joker's mind that has been broken. Ozymandias, Geppetto, and the Plutonian have higher body counts, but nobody has inflicted as much pain and suffering and enjoyed it as the Joker. He infamously tortured and murdered Jason Todd, paralyzed and traumatized Barbara Gordon, and shot Sarah Gordon point blank in the head as she rescued a baby. And those are only the ones we know about because they were part of Batman's crew. Plus, have you been reading Death of the Family? Not only is the Joker going around with his cut-off face strapped to his head, but he just recently kidnapped Alfred by hitting him in the head with a hammer and then pouring ammonia in his eyes. As recently discussed in Between the Pages, the Joker has always been a reflection of the horror movies of the times. And with torture porn filling the cineplexes, what hope does Gotham have? Batman and Jim Gordon recently said it best: there is no method to the Joker's madness, and therefore no way to try and counteract his evil deeds. All one can do is react to the horror and try desperately not to join the Joker in madness. The recent panels of Batman helplessly listening to a tape of Alfred being tortured is right up there with the disturbing images of the Killing Joke, hopefully the closest all of us will ever come to witnessing such pure evil. And that is my top 10 list of comic book villains. Please share your own list in the comments down below, and I hope you'll consider picking up Supurbia #1. I've included links in the video description for where you can order either a physical or digital copy, plus where to find a store near you that might be selling it. Plus, we've got a Supurbia Facebook page, which I hope you'll like, as you can get updates there on the book, plus discuss it with myself, artist Russell Dodderman, our editor Eric Harburn, and other readers. And that's this week's Stacktastic. I'm Grace Randolph for Think About the Ink, and I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Happy reading.